She was watching him. Only a few feet away, the mother leopard stood motionless, her breath shallow, her golden eyes fixed on the tiny life in his arms. The cub had nearly stopped breathing moments ago. Connor pressed it gently to his chest, feeling its fragile heartbeat slow, then flicker, then grow, and then movement. A weak cry. The leopard heard it too. She took a cautious step forward, the evening light catching the whiskers on her scarred face. No growl, no fear, just stillness. Then she did something no one could ever prepare for. She lowered her head, looked at the man, and nudged her nose toward the cub. Not to take it back, but to say thank you. So if you're still here, maybe this story found you for a reason. Not every rescue is loud. Not every miracle is filmed. But they happen in moments like this, when two hearts beat without words. Subscribe, not just to follow a channel, but to follow what still makes us human. Because stories like these, they aren't just told, they're felt. The wind carried nothing but silence. It was the kind of silence that only lives in ancient places, where time slows and the earth remembers things people forget. Namibia's Etosha plains stretched endlessly, bathed in a cold, fading light. Camelthorn trees stood like sentinels. The salt pans shimmered faintly, echoing heat long after the sun had vanished. Connor Hale stood alone, a man who once lived among the thrum of lectures, conferences, and the sterile buzz of labs now lived with jackals for neighbors and birds for alarms. He hadn't heard another human voice in weeks, and hadn't missed it. Not since the fire that took his sister. Not since the world had grown loud and hollow. But that morning, something shifted. At first, it was only a vibration in his chest, then a distant cry, raw, rasping, almost like the call of a bird of prey, but too deep, too desperate. He froze, listening. It came again, no mistaking it this time, the cry of a leopard in pain. He should have waited, called the park rangers, marked the sound, and logged it for observation. That's what the protocol said. But Connor Hale hadn't lived by protocol in years, and so, with only a canteen of water and his old veterinary bag slung over his shoulder, he followed the sound across dry earth and twisted brush, heart pounding not with fear, but with purpose. Something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Half an hour passed. The cry grew louder, then closer, then, suddenly, gone. And then he saw her. She was curled beneath a low-thorned tree, belly heaving, coat dusted with sweat and soil. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes, sun-gold, ancient, wild, locked onto him like knives. Blood stained her hind leg, and the rise and fall of her ribs told him what she couldn't. She was in labor. And she was struggling. He took a single step forward. She growled, low and broken. A warning, a plea. He stopped. This was no zoo, no clinic. This was nature at its rawest. A mother on the edge of life, her unborn cubs caught between breath and dust. One wrong move and she'd strike. And he'd never have a chance to regret it. But Connor had seen too much death to stand still when life begged for a chance. He spoke, not words, just sound. A calm hum, low and steady, like talking to a storm, knowing it can't hear you, but doing it anyway because silence is worse. She didn't run, didn't strike, she just watched. So he moved, slow as time. Sat a safe distance away, opened his bag, no sudden motions, no direct eye contact, just presence, just patience. The sun was climbing now. Heat rose in waves from the cracked earth. Sweat traced lines down his back as he watched her tremble, contractions coming harder, faster. And then, her body arched. The first cub arrived, tiny, golden, perfect. She licked it clean with trembling urgency, pulling it close with her paw. A moment later, the second followed, smaller but breathing strong. He could see the fatigue building in her bones, the effort of labor draining her faster than nature would allow. And still, she endured. Connor didn't move. Not yet. Not unless she asked him to. And then, a pause. A long, heavy silence. The third cub wasn't coming. She shifted, panted, strained. Nothing. Her eyes blinked slowly, and for the first time, they looked not through him, but into him, as if measuring something deeper than threat. She lowered her head to the ground, resting on her side. The wind returned, dry and bitter. Connor knew the statistics. In the wild, third cubs were often lost. The mother's body too exhausted, the world too harsh. But then, she growled again, weak, fragile, and the final cub arrived, limpio, silent. So still it barely looked alive. She licked it once, then again. But instead of pulling it to her chest like the others, she hesitated. And then she looked at Connor. Not a glance, a gaze. And with breathless precision, she nudged the motionless cub toward him. Once, twice, 3 times. A gesture so impossible, so beyond the realm of instinct, it shattered everything Connor thought he knew about predators, about motherhood, about the boundary between man and wild. This wasn't fear. This wasn't surrender. This was trust. The kind no textbook could explain. The kind you only earn in moments like this, where silence speaks louder than language, and 2 beings from different worlds decide, just for a heartbeat, to believe in each other. Connor didn't move. Not at first. The cub lay in the dust between them, barely breathing, its tiny chest fluttering like a candle in wind. The air felt suddenly heavier, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The mother leopard's eyes didn't leave him. She'd made her choice, and now, so did he. Connor dropped to his knees, slowly unzipping his canvas jacket. The cub was impossibly small, its fur damp with afterbirth, its legs limp, its heartbeat weak under his trembling fingers. He wrapped it carefully, pressed it against his chest, and whispered something, words even he couldn't remember. Maybe a prayer, maybe just sound, just something. The leopard didn't move. She lay in the dry grass, ribs rising and falling, like waves nearing shore, her other 2 cubs curled beside her, alive, breathing, safe. But her gaze was locked on the third, the one now in the arms of a human. There are moments when the wild world forgets itself, moments when instinct is quiet, when survival makes space for something else. This was one of those moments. Connor stood slowly, unsure of what to do next. Take the cub to his cabin? It needed warmth, hydration, oxygen, maybe. But even a 10-minute walk across open land would be too long, and leaving the mother behind, after everything, felt like betrayal. So he made a choice no training manual could have prepared him for. He stayed. There, under the flickering shadow of a camel-thorn tree, he sat cross-legged in the dust, cradling life against his chest, waiting for either breath or silence. The sun dipped lower. Shadows stretched across the plains like long fingers reaching for night. Jackals cried in the distance. A rustle in the nearby grass reminded him they weren't alone. Every minute brought the scent of blood further into the wind, and predators with it. But neither Connor nor the leopard moved. She was still bleeding slightly from her wounded leg, a deep gash, likely from an old snare. He could see it now, swollen, infected. She wouldn't survive the night like this, and yet she lay there, watching him, not with suspicion, not with fear, with something else. He reached slowly into his bag. The smell of iodine filled the air as he opened the first aid pouch. When he moved toward her, she tensed, but didn't strike. Just a low growl, like a warning from a tired sentinel. He stopped, sat again, waited. Then he did something no one dared before. He spoke to her. Not in words she'd understand, but in tones. A voice steady, measured, gentle. He remembered what his sister once said when calming a wounded cheetah in Botswana. They don't need language, they need truth. And so he gave her truth. His voice carried in the wind. Stories, apologies, songs, maybe nonsense, but honest nonsense. And as minutes passed, the growl faded. The leopard's ears twitched, then stilled. She allowed him closer. He crawled the last few feet, heartbeat thudding like thunder. Every step was a gamble, but every step was also received it. He stopped just beside her hindquarters. The wound was worse than he'd feared, deep, festering. He pulled out a mild anesthetic, just enough to dull the pain without endangering the cubs. As he injected it, she flinched, but didn't fight. He cleaned the wound gently, wrapping it with gauze from his kit. Blood seeped through the first layer. He wrapped it again. Above them, the sky shifted from gold to crimson. The last light painted the mother leopard in soft fire, making her look more spirit than creature. Behind him, the wrapped cub let out a sound. Weak, but louder than before. A squeak, a cry. He turned quickly. The tiny eyes were opening. And then, the impossible happened. The mother leopard rose. Slow, graceful, regal, even in exhaustion. She stepped forward, toward him, not with fangs bared or claws raised, but with a softness in her movement that didn't belong to predators. She looked at him, at the cub, and then at his hands. She sat, not to rest, not to guard, but to wait. There, in the silence of Namibia's dying daylight, two creatures from opposite sides of the world sat together, not as enemies, not even as allies, but as parents. She, a guardian of the wild. He, a man who'd once lost everything, both risking it all, for one fragile heartbeat wrapped in canvas and trust. The cold wind came again, but this time it didn't feel lonely. It felt like something had shifted. And the night would remember this. The moon had not yet risen, but the sky was already painted in deep indigo. The silence of the Namibian night pressed in around them, thick and sacred, like the world itself had paused to watch what came next. Connor's hands had gone numb, not from fear, not from exhaustion, but from holding a life so small, so fragile, that even the wind seemed too strong for it. The cub lay against his chest, swaddled in his jacket, its breathing shallow, but there, threaded into the stillness like a whisper refusing to fade. Across from him, the mother leopard rested with her two healthy cubs curled at her belly. Their tiny bodies rose and fell in perfect rhythm, as if the earth itself was exhaling through them. But she wasn't watching them. She was watching him. Her eyes, those ancient golden mirrors, never wavered from the bundled shape in Connor's arms. Not once. He'd spent his entire life studying wildlife, behavioral patterns, predator instincts, reproductive cycles. But nothing, no textbook, no lecture, no photograph, could explain what was happening now. Because this wasn't instinct, this wasn't survival, this was choice. And choice is the language of trust. The third cub, the runt, the fading heartbeat, had been given to him. Not abandoned, not discarded, but offered. And that made it sacred. Connor shifted the cub in his arms, checking for signs. Temperature, breath, pulse, a flicker of movement, the faintest cry. Still alive, still holding on. He pulled a small syringe from his kit, filled with rehydration fluid. It wasn't much, but it might be enough. Gently, he touched the cub's mouth, coaxing in a single drop. It flinched. Then again. The second drop disappeared. A sound escaped his throat, half sob, half laugh. Then something else happened. The leopard stood. Not quickly, not aggressively. She rose like a queen does, regal even in pain. Her limp was still visible, but steadier now, the bandage holding. Her two cubs blinked awake at her movement, then nestled deeper into the warmth of her body. And then she stepped toward him, one paw, then another. Connor didn't move. When she reached the space between them, the sacred space where the cub had been offered earlier, she stopped. Her gaze dropped to the jacket in his arms. She leaned her head slightly. Not a snarl, not a test, a request. So he unwrapped the jacket, exposing the tiny form, damp fur matted, chest rising just enough to be seen. The leopard leaned in, slowly, carefully. Her nose touched the cub's head, and for the first time, Connor saw it. Recognition. She knew this heartbeat, this scent, this soul. She licked the cub once, gently, the same way she had the others, then turned her gaze to Connor again, something in it beyond comprehension. Not gratitude, not relief, something older, something primal, like acknowledgement. Between equals, he placed the cub onto the cool earth between them, and waited. The wind brushed through the grass like a hush falling over a crowded room. The stars blinked to life above, the sky blooming with silver. The mother leopard lowered her body, nose brushing the cub's fur. She paused, then gently took the runt by the scruff. Delicate, practiced. But she didn't leave. She looked at Connor one last time, and in that look was everything science could never explain. A vow, a memory, a message sent across worlds without a single word. Then, without sound, she turned and padded silently back into the dark with all three of her children in tow. Connor didn't follow. He didn't need to. The moment had already carved itself into his bones, not just as a story or a miracle, but as a shift in his very idea of what it meant to belong in this world. He looked down at the blood-streaked canvas where the cub had lain, looked at the horizon, where the leopard had vanished into shadows and safety. Then he sat back, exhaled, and let the quiet hold him. And for the first time in years, he felt whole. Not because he had saved something, but because something had trusted him enough to be saved. The sky cracked open with morning light. Amber spilled across the plains like melted gold, and the shadows of the night withdrew, revealing a landscape reborn. Namibia breathed in again. Connor hadn't slept. He remained under the camelthorn tree, dust on his clothes, dried blood on his hands, and a hollow warmth in his chest where the cub had lain. But he wasn't alone. Not in the way he had been yesterday. And then, just as the first sunlight touched the salt pan's edge, he saw her, emerging from the tree line. Silent, effortless, real. The mother leopard. Her coat was dusted with morning dew. Her injured leg moved with care, but she walked with power, an ancient rhythm that had shaped the land itself. Her eyes scanned the horizon, alert but not afraid. Behind her, three small shadows, the cubs, and at the end, trailing behind just slightly, was him. The third, the runt, the almost lost. Connor stood, breath held, heart pounding with a kind of fear that had nothing to do with danger, and everything to do with hope. The cub was walking. Stumbling, yes. Smaller than the others, yes, but walking, living. The sun caught his pale fur, still lighter than his siblings, his spots not yet fully formed, but his eyes, they gleamed, wild, alive. And then something even more impossible happened. The leopard family didn't pass through. They stopped. At a distance, but close enough. Close enough for Connor to see the breath in their chests, to hear the tiny chirps of the cubs, to lock eyes again with the mother who, just hours before, had done what no wild leopard had ever been known to do. She looked at him, not with surprise, not with fear, but with memory, recognition. She didn't growl, didn't retreat. She simply stayed. And then the cub. That cub, the one Connor had held against his chest, wrapped in his jacket, fought to keep breathing. He looked at him too. Their eyes met. And for a moment, it didn't matter that one of them had fur and claws, and the other walked upright and carried pain in his hands. They were the same. They had shared something that belonged to neither species nor science. It belonged to trust, to instinct beyond instinct, to care that needed no language. Connor didn't move. He didn't reach for his camera. He didn't break the moment with human noise. He just stood there, letting it wash over him, letting the sun rise behind them, letting his heart remember how to feel without breaking. And then, just as silently as they had come, the leopard turned. She herded her cubs gently back toward the brush, vanishing into the trees, into the wilderness, into legend. But before disappearing completely, the third cub paused. He turned back, looked one more time, as if to say, "I remember." And then he was gone. Connor sat down in the dust again, in the same spot where life had slipped so close to ending, and then didn't. He exhaled slowly, a breath full of everything that had been lost, and everything that had just been found. There was no roar, no music, no applause, just the wind, the sun, and the knowledge that something had changed forever. He reached into his field journal, the one with dog-eared corners and coffee-stained pages, and wrote 7 words. She gave him back, and he lived. Then he closed the book and smiled. Because for the first time in years, it wasn't just research anymore. It was a story, and this story had just begun. A year passed, and the land changed with it. The rains came and went, turning dust to green, then green to ash again. Herds moved, skies shifted, and the wind carried new songs across the Namibian plains. But one thing stayed. Connor Hale, the man who once came to the wilderness to disappear, had instead been found. His cabin, once silent and weathered by loss, had become something else. A sanctuary, a listening post for miracles, a shrine to the moment that rewrote the rules of what he thought he knew. Framed photos now lined the walls, distant silhouettes of the leopard mother and her cubs at dusk, captured from afar with long lenses and longer patience. One image always stood out, the pale cub, eyes bright, standing at the edge of brush, halfway between wild and man. Connor had named him quietly in his notes. Riven, from river, because he had nearly drowned in silence and survived. But Riven didn't know the name. He only knew the man. And somehow, he remembered. The leopard family came back often, not close enough to touch, but never too far to forget. They moved like wind shadows, glimpsed in the golden hour, just before night took the plains again. But this time was different. It was late in the dry season. Dust hung in the air like memory. Connor had just stepped out onto the porch, a cup of black tea in hand, notebook tucked under his arm, and then he heard it. A rustle, a chirp, not alarmed, not frightened, just present. He turned, and there they were, the leopard family. But larger now, Riven had grown, taller, stronger, sleek with muscle, but still distinct. His coat still paler than the others, his spots less sharp. But his gait, it carried a confidence, a grace, A memory. Connor froze. This wasn't just a pass-by. They weren't here by accident. They were visiting. The mother stood in front, gaze steady, calm. Her old injury had healed well. A faint scar where Connor had once placed gauze. Her golden eyes held no threat, just something deeper. Connor stepped down from the porch slowly. No camera, no journal. Just breathe, just heart. And that's when he saw it. The mother leopard carried something in her mouth, not prey, not food, but a newborn. A second litter. 3 small cubs emerged from behind her legs, tumbling, curious, blinking into the morning light. And Riven, he wasn't a cub anymore. He was leading them. He walked toward Connor, no longer hesitant, no longer afraid. He stopped just 10 feet away. The others followed his lead. And then, the mother did something Connor would never forget. She placed the newborn cub at the edge of his clearing, gently, deliberately, then backed away. No threat, no noise, just that one quiet offering. Just that one quiet offering. Connor didn't move. The newborn blinked up at him, unsteady, breathing fast. It wasn't injured, it wasn't lost. It didn't need him. It was a gift, not to save, but to share. A message returned across time and silence. We remember, we trust, we know. Tears slipped down Connor's face before he could stop them. He crouched, careful not to touch, just close enough to feel the heat of the small body. He stayed there, heart open, until the mother returned and took the cub back into her jaws. And then, like smoke, they were gone. Back into the brush, back into the rhythm of the wild, back into the story that now belonged to both of them. That night, Connor sat at his desk and opened the final page of his manuscript, the book that had started as research and become something else entirely. He added one last paragraph. I once believed the line between man and animal was drawn in tooth and claw, but I was wrong. It's drawn in choice, in how we show mercy, in how we remember kindness, in how we return it when no one expects us to. And in one moment, under one tree, a mother gave me more than trust. She gave me back myself. He closed the notebook. The stars blinked above the roof, and somewhere in the dark beyond his porch, Riven watched